Welcome everyone to what I think will be an extremely interesting discussion about the intersection of two different things. One, obviously, the COVID crisis, and the other is the emerging importance of impact investing in our society, both domestically and internationally. We have an incredibly interesting group of people on our panel to discuss the issues. We have Laura Rothschild from Emmett Partners, and she's going to introduce Emmett Partners in a moment. We got Bert van der Vaart from SEAF. He's a founder and pioneer in international impact investment. And we got Chris Foreman, who's the managing partner of Emmett. So without further ado, could I just turn it over to Laura to introduce Emmett Partners, and then when she's done, let's have Bert give us a little bit of background on SEAF itself.
Thanks, Philip. Welcome, everyone. I'm Laura Fenster-Rothschild with Emmett Partners. Excited to be here to have this conversation with you today. Emmett Partners is an impact investment fund that was born out of a 20-year practice in the family office, really looking for how can we make an impact on the world. We believe that if we invest capital in entrepreneurs who are focused on problem solving, that we have the ability to both have financial benefit to our investors, and most importantly, to be able to make big changes in the world around us, both in society, socially, and in the environment. Small funds, 25 million, really looking for those tech entrepreneurs, those new folks who are coming to the table with innovation to manage problems we've all been focusing for a long time. I'll let Chris introduce himself, but I came to Emmett by way of social action, really. My career and my work is in large-scale community impact investment and impact moves. My doctorate's in community psychology, and this is a really exciting time where we're thinking about how do we marriage business and the impact that many of us have been working on in communities for a very long time. Excited to be with you.
Bert.
Terrific. Thank you, Philip, and thank you, Laura. SEAF was founded in 1989, basically on the proposition that there were underserved markets everywhere. There was, at the time, sovereign debt crisis, and there was a lack of employment opportunities, particularly in the emerging markets. So our DNA is that we believe that locally present entrepreneurs know best what is needed, products and services, and that by promoting the growth of these entrepreneurs, both by capital, risk capital, as well as by active business partnership, their growth results in improvements in the lives of the people and communities in these underserved markets. So as I said, we were founded in 1989. Over these 31 years, we've raised more than $1.3 billion and have done 40 funds. So they've been small funds. I think we really are delighted that this impact investment movement is coming to take into account both adequate commercial returns as well as intentional impact on the communities that are designed to be benefited.
And Chris, do you want to just introduce yourself, and then I'm going to ask you the first question to kick off the actual substantive part of the discussion.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Philip. And again, thanks everyone for participating in this. As Laura mentioned, Emmett was born out of a 20-plus-year-old family office practice out of recognition for the importance and need for impact investing as a strategy. I'm a co-founder and a partner at Emmett. In terms of our strategy, we're a venture capital fund focused primarily on seed round investments.
Okay, so let's go to the first question, Chris. This I'm going to direct at you, and then maybe once you've defined it, Bert can come in and give us the perspective from more of an international view. So
thank you.
there's a lot of different definitions of impact investment and investing out there in the marketplace. How does Emmett Partners define it, and how would you sort of distinguish yourself, and where do you think the definition is going?
Sure. First I would say that I think a lot of the confusion in the marketplace, which is changing. I think as people learn more about impact investing, some of that confusion is going away, but a lot of the confusion stems from the fact that there's still some misunderstandings of the difference between philanthropy and impact investing, which are two very distinct things. And there's also a misconception that impact investing means that you're taking some sort of concession on your return, which is not the case. As Emmett Partners defines impact investing, our strategy is an impact, or say an investment strategy that seeks to get market rate returns by investing in companies that are mission driven in their intent. Another way of saying that is companies that have identified a social or environmental problem and are creating solutions to those problems. As we see it, impact investing really is just smart investing. Whether you're an impact investor or a traditional investor, really ultimately what you're trying to accomplish is identify companies that are creating and offering products and services to a marketplace that address a problem or some unmet need in the marketplace. And one of the things that we find really compelling about impact investing is you're already starting with that demand. You're already starting with that identified problem, and you're offering a solution to that problem that already exists. So the way that we see it, impact investing is really just a smart way to invest and a smart way to get a strong return.
And Bert, do you have sort of an international spin on it? And maybe to the extent you can, try to draw distinctions between how Steve defines impact investing and how Chris set it out there for us.
Yeah, thanks very much. Certainly we agree that an important part, whether mission-driven on the part of the company or whether the ultimate beneficiaries are benefited by the products and services that the company that we're investing in is providing. There is, however, particularly on the international side, the United Nations has done a very good job introducing the Sustainable Development Goals, which really look at 17 areas where, let's say, the needs of particularly poorer people or the underserved markets are better met. So there's an intentionality that I think impact investment today does require. I agree with Chris that at some level, all investment has an impact, and certainly smart investment realizes what that impact has in a beneficial way, maybe a 360 way. But as we talk to at least our investors, there is a heightened degree to where the metrics that they want to see you, in addition to the commercial metrics, achieve, resonate, are related to the UN SDG goals, and really at the end of the day, achieve something positive. I mean, when we started in 1989, people were talking about CSR, corporate social responsibility. People were talking about negative screens. You look at Calvert, things of that nature. I really believe that impact investment today, and as some of the certainly investors we know today who believe it's an impact, an asset class, I really believe that today that level of intentionality and that level of achieving positive returns socially, in addition to achieving positive financial returns, is a distinguishing element. I think that's certainly the case on the international side. I think the U.S. is there's a lot of different things going on, and certainly accept what Chris is saying. But that's how we see the debate at this stage going.
Great, and that's a perfect transition for Laura. On my second question for the panel is directed specifically to Laura in the first instance. How important are the Sustainable Development Goals or SDGs with respect to impact investment? And how do you see that playing out in a domestic U.S. context, Laura?
I mean, I would say we live in a global world, right? So that's a good place to start. I think when any of us started this work 20 years ago or more, the world wasn't as global. And so when we were talking about international work, it was really separate from U.S. work. And that's not the case anymore. You know, we can't do what we do here without people in all other parts of the world being connected. And so one of the ways that we remain connected and that we move forward in the same direction is to have a unifying body. And for right now, and I think for good reason, the UN SDG goals provide that roadmap for us. They're a blueprint. They're a blueprint for us to say, how do we in these communities here and abroad, how do we make global impact that will have the trickle effects in lots of ways, in economy, in education, in healthcare, in mortality and morbidity rates. Like those are the ways that we're going to make big progress, because when you move one country, you move another one, as it is in 2020. And I think that's important to remember, and it's important for us to think about. When, you know, at Emmett, we're looking at the SDGs too. We're thinking about, well, we are thinking about domestic impact and what's happening here on our soil in the States. That doesn't mean that we're not thinking about what the trickle is and how that affects the global economy.
And Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just, you know, on top of what Laura's already said, I would say that the Sustainable Development Goals set out by the UN provide an excellent framework for identifying problems that we face. Sorry, I'm getting a little echo here. But, you know, as any framework, they are just that. They're a framework, and they're not intended to be an end-all, be-all of all things impact. And certainly there are problems that are not specifically laid out by the SDGs or are not fleshed out in a really detailed way. Things like race equality, which certainly is a very important topic of the moment. You know, it's sort of addressed in a very general way in the SDGs. It wouldn't surprise me if that area is defined, and the SDGs are continuously refined by the UN. So I guess I would say that they're a great framework, and we certainly look to them as a starting point for identifying problems that we want to address. But if something isn't necessarily set out in the SDGs, does not mean it's not an impact investment.
Thanks very much, Chris. Bert, do you have anything that you want to say on this particular topic in addition to what you already have said?
Yeah, and I certainly agree with what's said. I mean, one of the important initiatives that we're launching is on forcibly displaced people everywhere. There is no one SDG on forcibly displaced. On the other hand, there's dignity of work, there's gender equality, there's a number of things. So there are some cross-cutting levels. The SDGs are certainly not perfect. The other thing I would say is that the indicators, I think there's a lot of effort being spent to make more measurable indicators that are consistent with the SDGs so that people really have. But what's really good about the SDGs, I think, is that it really provides a framework in which these kinds of discussions can be held. And if I look all over the world, whether in Kuwait or whether in Europe or in Latin America, you can see the 17 SDGs and people respond to that. So this is an area, again, they're not rocket science, but they do define in a nice way those large areas that need to be dealt with, whether they are from gender equality, dignity of work, or clean energy / better use of water, or whether they are specifically in things like forcibly displaced people, which touch a number of those fronts. And I think racial equality or equality more generally is a theme, and I know this relates to the COVID side of way, because I think COVID has resulted in a shared in a sense of sharing internationally that I haven't ever seen in my time of investing. You know, every one of our 35 countries shut down because of COVID. So this is a time. It used to be if you had SARS, there was something in China, we would read about it, we would be concerned, but what it means is we wouldn't be fine. Now, whatever has happened in China, people in Guatemala, people in Moldova, they're all having to deal with the same issues. I've never seen anything like that, and I think it really does result in a high consensus community where these SDG goals can also be more of a universal language, which allow us, I think, as a community of impact investors, to address, to look at the significance and to really appeal to that sense of community, which gets then a little bit beyond just financial returns. I mean, I would say maybe as an additional, certainly financial returns in the impact investment side is important. This is not philanthropy. But it is also the case that in the past, some people would not let you take other considerations into account. Look at ERISA. The idea was we were going to be fiduciary only if we're looking at maximizing the return. Today, the conversation is resilience. The conversation is what's the community going to be doing? What's the long-term sustainability? You don't have to just think of stranded assets to see that the SDG goals, when they are implemented by entrepreneurs, by businesses, are really something that really involves more than just financial return. So I think that would be the only thing I would say that the SDGs, do have really moved the conversation with a lot of investors, specifically to that other consideration besides just money.
Thanks. And Chris, let's sort of try to merge the themes here. I mean, obviously, we're living in a global crisis, the COVID world that we face right now, and obviously there's a lot of impact, especially on minority communities and poorer communities, not only in the United States, but globally, in terms of higher death rates, higher infection rates, and so forth. How do you think COVID will be important in terms of impact investing? Is it just another factor that will make it evident to folks that impact investing is an important part of the future, or is there something more here?
Maybe on mute.
Hello?
Sorry, guys, I'm on mute there. I think the COVID pandemic hasn't necessarily changed impact investing or the focus of the space as much as it has served the purpose of highlighting how important impact investing is as an investment strategy and a thesis. I think the one thing that we can all agree on is that the current pandemic has enabled us all to kind of slow down in our individual lives and take account of what's actually important to us. And if you kind of look at what's happened across communities and across households, there's some common themes, right? It's things like, things that you previously took for granted, like having access to basic necessities, being able to go to the grocery store and buy food and feed your families, your children's access to high quality education. Certainly children being out of schools has shined a bright light on the importance of education and the role that education plays in our lives. And I think another thing is that with spending on consumer products being cut down during the pandemic, I think for a lot of people, it's really highlighted the fact that we all probably have a lot of excess in our lives, and we've all been spending less, and we've all kind of had the ability to sit back and say, well, I'm spending less, I'm buying less, but I'm not necessarily less happy. And it helps people understand, what is it that's really important in your life? And I think tying that back to impact investing, the problems that are addressed within the impact investment space are ones that don't come and go either with a pandemic or without one. they're there before, they're there now, and they will continue to be there. If anything, it's really shined a bright light on how important some of these issues are. So that's sort of our take on that. Laura, if you want to add anything on top of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's really articulate and clear. The thing that is really, when we planned for this webinar 2 weeks ago or a week ago when you got the announcement, the U.S. was in a really different place than it is today. We're seeing a very different level of civil unrest, and it doesn't escape me that this has had the space to rise up because we've been on pause, right? We're not distracted by other things, and we're really able to focus on problems that have existed historically in the U.S. in this way. And similarly, the problems that we all are trying to move the needle on for our investments and to think about, they're having the opportunity to rise up. And for me, that's a really good thing. That takes some of the flooding of the market out. It lets us look really carefully at where are the plays that are important and are going to move the needles in all kinds of ways. And it's unfortunate and exciting. And I think we're really able to drill down in ways that will give space for the future of what business will look like.
Bert, can I ask you, how do you think COVID pandemic has changed the investment priorities of your funds? I personally know that you have a lot of emerging market funds and SMEs, small and medium enterprises, women empowerment, et cetera. But do you see already an impact, or are you planning to have a change in direction of what you would normally or previously invest in versus what you will invest in? Or is it pretty much the same but just more impactful as possible?
It's a deep question, and it's a tough question. I think certainly on sectors, and we can talk about some of the different sectors, of course, there's a shift away from certain sectors, particularly where there's been mass meetings, whether entertainment or restaurants or even hospitals. I think there's a shift to online diagnostics, specialized clinics, et cetera, because a lot of people are trying to figure out how to improve resilience, how to improve health and wellness, how to keep their family safe, and how to keep society functioning. So, in fact, it's accelerating some of the digitization, fintech, and edtech and health tech. But the approach, what I would say is there's a realization that resilience is more important. That perhaps people were looking at returns without adequately factoring risks of things like the COVID pandemic. And I think there is a desire to have some greater degree of local supply chain issue. Not all, I don't think that China will stop exporting, but I think there is a great interest from a lot of in our countries to have more locally or regionally sourced production. I think on the investor side, I think there is an interest to reduce risk. Of course, at the same time, if you look at how the governments are responding, they are flooding the market with cheap debt and trying to keep interest rates down and deferring things. And that means that, and there's a lot of people who are trying to put debt out because I think there's an uneasiness or uncertainty about, is the equity markets going to be robust 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? So there's, in some of our funds and some of our investors, there's a desire to see some kind of a current return, as well as growth capital that would result in good returns. So that, combined, it might be a 2% current coupon on invested capital, and it might be a 10 to 15% net IRR on the growth side. I think that there are a lot of investors who would prefer that than let's pray that in 7 years we're going to have 30% IRR, because I think the longer term horizons are less clear. So we're seeing a focus on growth capital. We're seeing a focus on some kind of modest short-term return, as well as, and we are known as growth capital and not as a debt shop. So certainly to see how can we work together with these entrepreneurs to improve their resilience, reduce the kind of risk that they can take it out. And again, I think that many people see impact as beneficial in that regard, because impact looks at the most important problems to solve. We're not getting into fashion industry. We're not investing into movies. What we're really talking about is what are the basic needs and how can they be addressed. So I think on the investor side, there's I think uncertainty all around. There's a desire to be closer to home. So even though global lessons learned are there, I can tell you that the European investors are really interested in the Maghreb, the Levant areas around Europe, because these are where both migrations happen. These are where both labor costs are cheaper, so they might move some of their manufacturing costs there. The United States, Central America, Northern Latin America, or Caribbean are also markets that seem to be more attractive to those people who might have been in emerging markets before. In other words, getting closer to home is something which I think people believe would benefit and would be less, let's say, sensitive or less reactive to the next epidemic or the next kind of global downturn. So I think I have seen those differences. At some level, they're an acceleration of what we saw before. Digitization was there before. But I think today, fintech, because you also have the ability to do a lot of your financial work on a platform, it reduces the amount of personal contact. Similarly, in health diagnostics or ed tech, online kind of training issues, there is probably a speed up in those. And we certainly see in our portfolio those companies are doing well. Supermarkets are doing well. These are essential businesses, whereas other forms of retail, are doing less well. So I know that's a partial answer. I know there's a lot of other questions to answer, but these are certainly what we see.
Thanks. So Laura, in terms of your existing portfolio, are you guys sort of assessing on a regular basis whether you're going to perhaps have to throw more equity or some debt into these entities because of the impact of COVID, or are these the investments that you've done somehow surviving the pandemic?
That's a great question. The way that we think about investment and the way that Emmett approaches our partnerships with companies is that they have a problem to solve. So when we approach a company from the beginning, we're asking them, what problem are you trying to solve? And if those problems are authentic and they exist in the world, they have shown to be authentic and exist in the world during COVID, post-COVID, pre-COVID, and sometimes even heightened in this post-COVID atmosphere. And so we are not needing to throw a lot of debt into companies. They're not needing sort of the bailout as some groups that might not have essential services, because in many ways they are essential. They're responding to essential problems in the world. I have an awful rainstorm going on here, and so I have no idea if folks can hear me, but that is the situation in the background, real time, online. Okay. And so in that way, we're actually seeing our portfolios do quite well post-COVID. And the reason they're doing quite well is some of the things we've already discussed, that there's a highlight on the needs that they're addressing, that they continue to be able to work because they're working locally, because they don't have huge sort of supply chain issues that are crossing waters. And people are starting to say in lots of areas, what do we need to spend money on? What's really important? So for example, one of our portfolio companies is a technology-based consumer product that had started its work in baby healthcare. It's a baby monitor that also monitors temperature and heart rate. And they always knew that there were opportunities for use of the technology in other spaces. What the world realized when COVID hit was that they needed this wireless technology in lots of spaces. They needed it in our healthcare systems, where now we weren't sending doctors into the rooms with patients as often because we're trying to reduce the spread. They needed it in our senior care facilities for the same reasons. And so the problems existed. And when we paused and we saw what was happening in the world, it actually became fertile ground when you're ready and when you're prepared to grow. And that's what we're seeing happen for many of our companies in that way. And so we're excited about it. And we're excited because they are getting the time to do the work they need to do. And we're seeing really great things happening.
Thanks. Bert, I'm sure you're going through a similar process at Steve. Do you see any factors in the international sphere that make the analysis of this problem different, or is it essentially the same analysis that Laura just spelled out?
No, I think what Laura is. We're focusing on essential needs, and I think we're focusing on ways to address those needs that are taking into account the post-COVID common experience, really amazingly common experience globally. How my teams in Morocco and Guatemala and Bangladesh are dealing with it's very similar to our lockdowns here in DC. I do see, as I say, I think innovation or bringing some tech-enabled internet component is there. I think that if you look at large-scale hospitals or large-scale retail or even commercial real estate, I think those are going to have to. I'm sure they will think of ways, but I think those are going to be, let's say, not in the front. But I think from some supermarkets to ed tech to diagnosis for health for rural areas, some of the things that we were doing before, even the supermarkets are able, because they're able to provide some protection, but they become incredibly important, and they've added delivery, they've added curbside pickup, they've added things that are and internet ordering, et cetera. And this is like in Serbia. This is not just in Falls Church, Virginia. So we really are seeing, I think, the implementation of digital, the interface of the internet with the delivery of essential products and services. I think that's really moving all over our country. So I think we're probably never been closer than that. And a lot of the lessons learned that we were picking up in the United States and Europe were very quickly adopted in the emerging markets.
Chris, do you see the same theme domestically in the U.S. in terms of the importance of digitization and technology as being perhaps the way to better improvement of the social context for impact investing folks?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our entire focus is on technology solutions that are contributing towards solving large-scale social and environmental problems. And the portfolio company Miku that Laura mentioned is a great example of that. One of the things that we've always said is, if you kind of look at the way that the broader marketplace, outside of impact investing has been heading, the last 10 years or so, the vast majority of innovation and venture capital funding has gone towards developing bigger and better ways to market and sell products to people. And one of the big buzzwords in buzz areas these days is AI, and people talk about AI. But a lot of that, again, is more of the same. It's, how do we use machine learning to better target and sell products to people? One of the questions we've always asked is, well, instead of using all this brain power to figure out how we can better sell stuff to people, why not figure out ways that we can identify and treat health issues within individuals, identify and develop tailored curricula towards children in the educational environment. And Miku is a great example of this. As a monitor that monitors respiratory rates, one of the things that they've been able to do with the data that they've collected is be able to identify someone becoming sick before they're even showing symptoms of being sick, which is clearly a very important area and one that's very beneficial to our society. So, that's one example, but, that sort of speaks to the important role that technology can play and frankly should play in moving our society forward.
Thank you. I mean, it seems to me that across all asset classes, technology seems to be a real engine during this crisis. Bert, when you, I mean, some of the people that are on this phone may be considering allocating capital to impact investing. And as somebody that has obviously been one of the pioneers in this area, especially internationally, what do you think about that, and what do you say to people when they ask you questions about whether they should be allocating capital to impact investing?
Great question. I mean, I think there are many different reasons that get to impact. I mean, I think many family offices or wealth managers have increasingly gotten, whether they're millennial or before millennial, interest on the part of individuals who want something. They want their capital to do something more than just make money. And I think particularly in the world where interest rates are very low, they said, look, if I'm going to get 4% or 6%, I'd like to see that my money is doing something positive. I agree with Chris that certainly on a longer term basis, taking care of have-to-have needs does not mean there needs to be any trade-off, but there is at the same time no longer the idea, okay, I'll make a lot of money on cigarette smoking or on coal mines, and then I'll give 5% of it away as charity. That kind of bifurcation isn't there anymore. People want to live, they want their money to do what their money should do, but in a way that also improves the world. I think some pension funds, I mean, Christian Supra in Australia has really gone, has grown significantly as a pension fund because it offers a specific impact asset class for people to invest in. And they found that a lot of teachers in particular, but people more generally, originally was, I think, for church people, and now it's expanded to take a lot of teachers and a lot of other individuals who want their pension to be tied up in doing positive impact things. And so they're using it as a marketing tool. I mean, I think they believe it. They're certainly, they have dedicated resources on the analyst side. But I think what they're saying is we hear people in the market who want their money to be associated with good things, particularly with these SDG kind of issues, which are clearly very positive things that you could tell your children about what you're doing. So when if you do it for those reasons, I think it would both be solid returns and they would be returns that anticipate or really respond to the preferences of your ultimate investors, whether they're the owners of the pension fund or whether they're the families, next generation coming up or whatever. So I think people need to take into account that there are a lot of people in the world, I say maybe even the majority, who increasingly are concerned that their money is tied up in doing positive things as well as earning. And that's why I think asset allocators who have perhaps not done much in impact before should really consider. Now, is it 3%? Is it 20%? There is a total impact movement going around that there are a number of families in particular that are Charlie Kleisner and people like that have been leaders on that one. But I think what we're seeing more and more, even in pension funds in Europe in particular, they want to have a portion of their pension funds with impact. Some of that is the theme like climate change. If you look at insurance companies, for example, they're very keen on being associated with climate change. It's a kind of a hedge of some ways. It's also calling attention to it. Others for gender, others for education, et cetera. But I think that if you want to be seen as being associated with your money, both making a financial return and doing something specifically positive. I think having an allocation to impact makes sense.
And Laura, how are you guys thinking this one through, and what are you talking about with folks that are sort of sticking their toe in the water here?
Yeah. I mean, Chris said this when we started. We really see impact investing as just smart investing. We know that there's a distinction because we are committed to measuring both our financial returns and our environmental and societal returns, and that they are equally important to us in our motives to move. But it's good investing. And so you can really align your financial returns with the vision you have for the world. And there's no reason not to do that. This isn't a time where you have to invest other places to make the market rate returns. It's not the case. And we've been able to show that. And in some ways, this post-COVID environment has heightened that, because we've been able to look at our impact portfolios, and our colleagues who are invested, in all kinds of impact ways are saying the same thing, that if you're focused on problems that exist, even when the world pauses, you're going to get the returns that you want. And you're not going to have to pause in your financial returns in the same way. And so in some ways, it's maybe less risky than it ever was before to focus on that, and to be thinking about that. There isn't a person in the world who would say that they want the world to end the day after they die. And so how do we create legacy, both financially and in the work we're doing? And we can put our money to work to create those legacies.
Well put. Chris, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I would just say that, for people looking to allocate capital towards various investment strategies, like anything else, whether it's impact or not, you need to ask yourself, what are you trying to accomplish? If your goal is purely to make money, well, then my answer there would be, well, impact is a great place to look. It's very much our thesis and belief that over the next decade, impact investments are really going to see a very strong return. And as some of the markets that have been very ripe over the last decade, things like mobile technology, social media, advertising technology, where a vast majority of capital funding has been directed, as those markets mature, people find themselves asking, okay, this last decade's been great. Where do I look to put my money over the next decade? Where are those next returns going to come from? We strongly believe that the world is heading in a way where people legitimately care about these problems, and particularly as younger generations are out there starting companies and are taking control of wealth, it's becoming more so. So from a return perspective, we see impact investing as a place that you really should be looking at. But if some of the kind of non-financial return aspects are important to you as well, you need to ask yourself, well, what are those things that are important to us, and align yourselves with a fund and with strategies that align yourselves with those issues. If education is important to you, or climate change is important to you, there's certainly funds out there that address that. And as Bert touched on, the world of foundations that existed in the past, whereby you would sit on 95% of your assets and invest those assets in any strategy, and then 5% of them would go towards things that were aligned with your mission. That's not really something that exists now, or it's definitely a space that is changing, whereby people are realizing we can take that 95% of capital and put it to work in things that are mission aligned and get the returns that we're seeking.
Correct.
Thank you. Bert, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I just think that's absolutely correct. And I think the Jobs Act is a positive issue. And obviously, I could ask you, Philip, because you've been involved with many securities laws and regulations in terms of what can happen with money. I mean, since the Jobs Act, I think the U.S. government has at least indicated that pension funds can take into account other things besides financial returns, even though you still have the obligation to provide the kind of risk-adjusted returns that fiduciaries should do. But I think it's a recognition, whether it started with stranded assets, where the coal mine is, they're generating the same kind of sales, but I think people realize is that there's externalities that weren't covered, and so people began to move away from coal. People moved away from cigarettes. People moved away, I think, from companies that are associated with injustice of many sorts. So I think we are seeing that. I know Dan Owen was talking about the need for impact investment. That they said, look, we're 140 countries, but if our milk powder in Chad is sub quality and hurts, it's going to be on the internet tomorrow. And all of a sudden, all our yogurt sales in the grocery stores are going to just collapse. So people realize this is a part of the risk side, which I don't think investors, maybe particularly before COVID, but did not really associate with investment that damaged people, where the externalities weren't taken care of, or where there was even a lack of positive impact. So I think that the world is more fluid. I think the world understands, and certainly with internet, the holistic issue of what my money does. And I think impact is a very important lens that, frankly, all investments, I agree with Chris, all investments do make impact, and you better be aware of the impact that they make. But if you want to go a little bit safer, then you go into investments that do take impact into account specifically, and as a part of the return that these managers will give you.
Thanks. So we're coming up to the end of the hour. I have one more question. But before I ask the question, first of all, I want to apologize about the technical problems that I've had with my video. Apologies to everyone. But secondly, if anyone in the audience has a question, please send it. I will be receiving it on a momentary delay, and then I will relay it to the panelists as is fitting. But while folks are busily pondering what questions they have, the final question I have for the panel is, what would you say, and I'm going to just go around to each of you and have you answer this particular one. Why should asset allocators make impact investment? And related to that question is, do you consider impact investment an asset class? Why don't we start with you, Chris?
Yeah, so, to kind of reiterate something I said a couple minutes ago, we really see impact investing as the direction that all investing is heading. And we really see impact investing as kind of the strategy and thesis where financial return will exist over the next decade or beyond. So from a return standpoint, we think it's a really smart choice to be allocating capital towards impact strategies. With respect to whether impact is an asset class, I think the answer to that question is no. And in fact, I think it's kind of a funny thing, right? Because when you talk about non-impact strategies, they're so minutely delineated across, is it equity? Is it debt? If it is equity, is it private capital? Is it public capital? If it's private, is it growth? Is it late stage buyouts? Is it early stage investing? And people kind of look at and analyze the return.
You're breaking it up a little bit. You're breaking it up a little bit.
And people look at and analyze each of those delineations in a very minute way. What I find interesting is people will kind of throw out there, what are the returns in impact investing? Mm-hmm. And kind of lump all those strategies into one thing. Well, all those various strategies that exist in a traditional investing world exists within impact investing as well. You have public funds, you have late stage buyout funds, you have early stage funds such as ourselves, you have debt focused funds. So I think an asset allocator, you first need to ask yourself, what asset class do I have comfort with? Do I have comfort with alternative investment strategies? Am I a private equity investor? Am I a public equity investor? And within those asset classes, then seek out impact strategies.
I think I would just add to that I think calling it, for me personally, designating impact for all the reasons Chris offered as a separate asset class also minimizes our ability to make smart decisions about what we're doing with money across classes. We need to hold ourselves accountable across the classes to think about how are these investments being made, what is happening with our money, and not on the side having those conversations. And so integration is the way to be, I think, one of the ways we can move forward.
The reaction, I agree with what Christian is saying. I think absolutely, Christopher is saying is there's an enormous amount of different types of return risk kind of profiles of investments all across the board. That includes all those investments that are related to SDG or to soi-disant impact. But I will say that in some cases, pension funds, et cetera, who are nervous about slipping too quickly into investments that do have, that do take into account specifically an intentionality with respect to impact, at least the debate is worthwhile, because the debate, they either come to where Laura comes out, or, hey, all of what you should do should have an impact kind of lens in it. It should be integrated what you do. Or at least it says, well, I'm going to offer something called impact. Maybe within the impact there would be some very gross distinctions, maybe an equity, debt, and real estate. I think Christian Super has about $1 billion into impact and what they call an impact asset class. The nice thing is if you look at their returns, they'll have a real estate fund, they'll have a public equity class, and they have the impact. And the impact will be 40% allocated to real estate, green real estate, et cetera, et cetera. And at some level, by calling it an impact class, they are challenging the other people to say something about impact. So this may be a transition issue. I mean, if the world that Christopher is talking about, I'd love that. We're all impact. But in the meantime, it might make sense for people to talk about impact as an asset class, just so that at least the large pension funds, the APGs of the world, would put a portion, perhaps where this can be voluntarily chosen, perhaps where asset allocators are looking for impact. I think UBS is setting up various impact funds. And that's not to say that the other funds that they're doing don't have impact. It's just that they're actually measuring and are intentional with those funds they're calling impact. So the reason, Philip, that you asked this question is because there's a number of different answers to it. I think it certainly it's worth taking into account the need for conventional large asset managers to maybe put their first toe into the water by offering something that is more specifically delineated as having impact as a core in their investment decision process. My hope is that when people see, well, wait, there's one that says impact, and this is what Christian Super says in Australia. I think their returns on a melded basis are around 8%, which is right in the middle of all their asset classes. So they say, look, I'm demonstrating that you can achieve a decent return, but have this kind of additional layer of intentionality and of metrics, et cetera. I think in the long term, this is the way that all investments should be. I would hope nobody would want to put money in something that's deliberately going to destroy the environment or damage children or whatever else. But this is certainly, I think, where there could be some differences of opinion, and I'm happy with both sides of that opinion.
And I mean, maybe there's not a right answer, right? Those are two things. It's it's a lens to look at all of your investments, and it's a way to allocate funds. And so
Absolutely.
until we all, and I think it'll be a long road before we come to some kind of.
I think so. And it's important. It's important that we make returns. I think right now, the important thing, Philip, sorry about it, I know we're running over, but I think it's so important that people who are doing impact investment do so with a heart, but also with a head, because I think the worst thing for this movement would be for people to say, well, my intentionality is so important that I can somehow not do the diligence or not worry on the structure, so that at the end of the day, maybe we don't get those returns in, because at that level people will say, oh, impact, yeah, I tried that once, it doesn't work. So I think we have to have that responsibility.
Perfect. Unfortunately, not to cast a guy. We have no questions from the attendees, which is fine. I don't mean to castigate you guys. I want to emphasize to all the attendees that they should feel free to reach out to any of the participants to ask any further questions.
Sure.
We're considering kind of taking this band on the road, if you will, and doing a few more of these. If folks thought that this was valuable or not valuable, please let us know, and how we could make this better would be great. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, and I want to thank from the bottom of my heart Laura and Bert and Chris. I think that you really provided a very interesting and stimulating background and insights into impact investing and the intersection with COVID. And I hope to be seeing you guys more.
Perfect. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Doug.
Bye-bye.